Good morning, everyone. I'll leave my camera on. I think it's always helpful when the presenter has the camera on. So my name's Carla Gamma. I am the lead principal social worker for adults for West Northamptonshire Council. Really pleased to be here today to be delivering this session. We do have an hour, and you'll probably see there are 33 slides on there. I've decided to put quite a bit on, so even if we can't go into depth within the session because it is an hour, at least you have the information, and there's a reference list at the end as well, so there is sort of further reading that you can do. So what I'll try to do today is sort of provide you an overview in terms of what trauma-informed practice means. So Chloe, could you move to the next slide, please? So in terms of our learning objectives, it's about understanding trauma, how it impacts on people, and how we as professionals can develop a trauma-informed approach in our practice. So that's what we're going to be focusing on within this hour. Next slide, please, Chloe. So first, just to be mindful that anyone can experience trauma and it all affects us in different ways. But also other people's responses to trauma can also affect us. So it's about taking a pause and taking a break whenever we need to, as well as professionals. I think it's important to highlight. And thinking about trauma and a trauma-informed approach about an us and not a them approach. So lots of people come into health and social care as professionals with a history of trauma, which is sometimes what motivates people to come into that to the field in the first place. So it's about looking after ourselves as well as professionals. Obviously the people we work with are extremely important, but if we're not well, how can we support others? So just to start the session with that as well. Next slide, please, Chloe. I think somebody's got their mic on. Okay. So why is trauma-informed practice?
This is Eve, Domestic Abuse Agency.
So why is trauma-informed practice important in the context of adult social care? So the people we work with are likely to be working with people with significant trauma histories, colleagues, people that we actually work with, and trauma is everyone's business. It can impact significantly on people's psychological, physical health and well-being. And it's about understanding that those in most need of services may also be the hardest to reach and least likely to engage effectively with services. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a little while. So trauma-informed approaches and relationship-based practice. In effect, a trauma-informed approach is a relationship-based approach. So that can help the people that we are working with in terms of the healing process. So it's important to note that people can and do recover following trauma, but that also can depend significantly on the support that they do have or they don't have in some cases, unfortunately. So through that trauma-informed practice and collaborative engagement, those people can harness the skills and overcome those traumatic experiences. So trauma-informed approaches are supported by our organisational environments. That's why we're here today. So we're looking at working in a way that prevents re-traumatisation and that vicarious trauma in us as practitioners in order to be able to foster healing and recovery. When I talk about vicarious trauma, that's where a person's experience, so as professionals, being exposed to the traumatic experiences of others starts to impact on us. Many of you may have heard the term compassion fatigue, and that's where it links to as well. We'll talk about that in, I believe it's the next slide, when we're looking at different types of trauma. So as practitioners, working with people who have experienced trauma, we're at risk of experiencing that phenomenon of vicarious trauma. So we need those supportive environments and those good working practices, reflective supervision being critical to enable us to emotionally protect ourselves as professionals. so that we can engage in that trauma-informed relationship-based practice with the people we work with. Next slide, please, Chloe. That working well? Yeah. So what is trauma? It's very complex. So trauma is much more than a story about the past that explains why people are frightened, angry, or out of control. Trauma is re-experienced in the present, not as a story, but as profoundly disturbing physical sensations and emotions that may not be consciously associated with memories of past trauma. So this is a quote that I thought would capture the best definition of what trauma means. So it's about the past, it's about the present, and it impacts on the future as well. So it's a very complex term and experience. Next slide, please, Chloe. So the different definitions of trauma. So we've got type 1 trauma. So an acute trauma experience as a result of a single event. So, for example, it could be it being involved in a terrorist incident, for example, or a type 2 complex trauma. So this is where there are multiple long-standing or repeated experience of varied and multiple traumatic events, often of an invasive and interpersonal nature. So that is an integrative term, so it encompasses both the exposure to multiple chronic or recurrent traumatic experience and the wide-ranging and long-standing impact of those experiences. And the vicarious trauma, which I'd already explained and referred to previously. So it's that emotional and health impacts of a person's traumatic experiences and symptoms on empathetically connected helping professionals, so people in this room. I've put a link in there for you. You will have access to the slide, so then you can explore that as well. So different types of trauma that we may come across with the people that we support. Can I have the next slide, please, Chloe? So obviously we don't have a lot of time, but I did want to put a little reflection point in there. If we did have more time, I'd sort of put you in breakout rooms, but just for the purpose of this session, due to our time constraints, I'm going to ask you to take a couple of minutes to think about the people that you work with. Think about what types of trauma have the people you work with experienced. And how do you know or recognise that someone you are working with is traumatised? So I'm just going to give a couple of minutes just so that you can, it's a Monday morning, just to get you start thinking as well, and relating what we're discussing with the people that you work with, so that it goes from a theoretical concept to an actual practice, embedded into practice. I'll give you a couple of minutes just to think about that. You can take some notes as well if that helps with your thinking. Okay, I know I'd love to be able to give you more time and time to discuss with each other, but it doesn't stop you from speaking to each other after the session. So I'm sure that if I was to go around the room, there would be a long list of things that you would be able to share in terms of the people that you work with and the types of traumas that they may have experienced. So the point being that there isn't a set list of events or experience that we can name as trauma. It's about how an event or an experience has impacted on that person. Obviously, we're all different. We all have different contexts. So there can be different protective factors or exacerbating factors to that trauma. Obviously, we don't always know what someone's life history, what someone's life experience is, but we can recognise some of those signs, and we can work with people in a trauma-informed way without those details, because it's about that relationship. So being trauma aware doesn't mean we have to have a detailed account of everything someone's been through, because actually sometimes asking for that could actually re-traumatize the person. It's about that reliving of the trauma. So it's having that relationship, that building of trust, that empathy, that safe space where we can support the person is the way forward, I suppose, rather than having the need to have all the details before we're able to support, if that makes sense. So you might not always receive a disclosure of trauma, you might not know all the details, but developing your awareness and your understanding of trauma without that disclosure, by prioritising it, prioritise what your ethical considerations, considering confidentiality, considering and putting the well-being of that individual at the forefront, but also striving to cultivate a compassionate and informed approach in which we respect those boundaries and we promote a safe environment in order to support that person, even if we don't know what the person's past is or what the experience is really important. Can I have the next slide, please, Chloe? So in terms of recognising trauma, it could be that you see physical signs. So you may not know what's going on or what has gone on, but you might see some physical signs. So it might be that the person's got unexplained aches or pains. There may be changes in sleeping patterns, or either insomnia or excessive sleeping. There may be fatigue or low levels of energy, somatic complaints without a medical cause, or some of the emotional signs. You might see mood swings, sudden changes in the person's temperament, persistent feelings of sadness, anxiety or fear, irritability, agitation, anger, outbursts, or even an emotional numbness or detachment, or on the other side, hypervigilant or being easily startled. So these are just some of the signs that I thought would be helpful to maybe get you thinking when I asked you to go back and think about someone that you're working with. So there might be others that you think, oh, hold on, some of these signs and symptoms, I've seen this in somebody else, just to sort of get us thinking. Next slide, please, Chloe. There may be some behavioural signs. So withdrawal from social interactions, isolation, avoiding situations, changing in eating habits, substance abuse, increased use of alcohol, drugs, or so-called self-destructive behaviour or risk-taking behaviours. In terms of cognitive signs, you might see difficulty concentrating or actually making decisions. You can see issues, you may see issues around memory or becoming forgetful, intrusive thoughts, flashbacks related to that traumatic experience. The person might be experiencing confusion or disorientation. Next slide, please, Chloe. In terms of relational signs, there might be difficulty trusting others or forming close relationships. This is really significant for us as professionals, because if the person has difficulty trusting others, has difficulty forming relationships, they may not be able to what we usually refer to as engage with us as professionals. So it's really important to think about these things. So it could be a case of, it's not that they don't want to engage, it's that they're not able to, but we will come to that a little further into the presentation. So really important to think about this. The person may struggle with intimacy or maintaining healthy boundaries, might be experiencing relational conflicts or challenges in communication, might not be able to communicate in a way that we can understand. In terms of their functional abilities. There may be decreased ability to perform daily living tasks or responsibilities, a decline in their work or academic performance. There might be some which could lead to financial difficulties or instability as a result of the above. Next slide, please, Chloe. Oh, just realised another typo there in my presentation, apologies. Which also, and the last sort of sign in terms of what you could see is reactivity to triggers. So there could be a heightened emotional response to triggers that reminds the person of their past traumatic events, or even difficulty in managing stress or coping with minor challenges. And so, like I said, these are some examples of what you might see, what you might identify. But it's really important to note that all of these signs and symptoms can vary widely amongst individuals, and not everyone will display the same indicators. Also, these signs may not be solely attributed to trauma and could stem from other underlying issues. So obviously it's a good starting point, but people are different. People can react, cope with in different ways. So you may or may not see all of these, but I thought it'd be good to put some indicators for you. Next slide, please, Chloe. So trauma is common. So some forms of trauma and adversity are so common that they've actually been normalised. So these could be social and economic traumas such as racism, homophobia, poverty, inequality, really important contemporary sort of issues that we are living within our society. So things to consider, historical traumas as well, legacies of violence committed against groups. Also very important to consider when working with people. So people experience the same trauma event in unique ways, and that will depend on a variety of factors such as their gender, their cultural beliefs, their social supports, their age, their opportunity. So the way that people experience or understand or live with will depend on them as a person, their individual characteristics. But it is common. Next slide, please, Chloe. I'm not sure how that is. Yeah, so I've got the whole thing. So I've put this pyramid here, which really explains the trauma impact on contact with professionals. So the external behaviour is what we see as professionals, which were some of those signs and symptoms that I discussed previously. And those are or can be the person's survival responses as a result of those experiences of trauma. So really important to see that the top, the small bit at the top is the external behaviour of what we actually see. There's a lot more at the bottom that needs to be considered. So it's really important for us to look at reframing the concept of poor engagement or disengagement as a result of this. So it's very, what we see is very small in comparison to what's behind it or what's below it, beneath the surface. So really important to talk about sometimes the barriers that services or professionals inadvertently, but it still can be the case, put in the way of people that are accessing the support. I can't work with you unless you attend sober, or you don't shout, or you answer these questions. So it's about thinking about those things. It could be that is the person's coping mechanism, and so it's thinking how can we work with the person and around these things in a relationship-based, trauma-informed approach. Next slide, please, Chloe. So this slide we could spend a lot of time talking about this slide. So this represents that tip of the pyramid. So the bad, in commas, behaviour iceberg. So what we see. As professionals, we can see refusal, we can see anger, we can see shouting, we can see a lot of things, but there could be a lot underneath that. So it could be anxiety, it could be stress, it could be shame, it could be that the person feels disempowered, discomfort. And we have to think about that in the person's own context. So what's their family dynamics? What support systems has the person got? Have they got any available support? So there's a lot going on underneath in relation to what we're actually seeing. Also important to highlight that you may see that somebody actually appears to be okay, but that could be dissociation can be present with somebody being okay or not affected by their experience. It doesn't mean that there aren't those feelings and that confusion going on underneath. So not taking things at face value, I suppose. But just a sort of rhetorical question, I suppose, as we have a limited time. So think about your own coping mechanisms when you have a stressful day or a stressful week. Some will be healthier than others, we're all different. What if someone came along and just told you to stop doing that? Don't use that coping mechanism. You can't use that coping mechanism anymore. How might you react to that? So thinking about that to help you build greater empathy for the coping behaviours of others, of people that we work with, is a good starting place. So just a question for reflection, another question for reflection. Next slide, please, Chloe. So the 5 principles of a trauma-informed approach. I got this from Community Care Informed, very recent article. I've got the link in the references, good article to read. So the first one is about safety. So a physical and emotional safety are key. People who are experiencing trauma might have developed an overactive stress response system. They often feel unsafe. So to do meaningful work, it is essential to make that child or adult feel safe in the first place as practitioners. So we need to be really open and honest in explaining what's happening and why at every stage. We need to consider intersectionality and how to meet people's needs for cultural safety. So minority groups are often disproportionately affected by trauma, and discrimination can compound its impact. So important to be aware that re-traumatization can occur when we're talking about a specific event. So we should make it clear to the people that we work with that they don't have to talk about the specific details. And when gathering information for assessments, it's not necessary for us to know the full details, but rather the impact of the trauma and any recovery. So building of trust and feeling safe with the practitioner, it may be that individuals feel comfortable to then disclose that past trauma. But again, the key is in building that relationship and making sure that the person feels safe. Next slide, please, Chloe. So the second principle of trust. So all of these principles are linked. You can't do one without the other, I suppose. In terms of trust for individuals who have experienced trauma in the context of relationships, it can be very difficult to establish trust. So that's why you may have someone that isn't really engaging, don't really like using that word, but doesn't seem to be engaging with you. They can't trust you. That's why they can't really establish that relationship. So we can develop trust by implementing good personal and professional boundaries. Being aware that you may need to re-establish trust each time you meet that person. So it might not be enough to start building that relationship at the first time you have contact, but it's a continuous development of that trust. Being reliable, being honest about what you can and can't do, whilst recognising and addressing the power imbalance between yourself and the person that you're supporting. Using that non-judgmental, compassionate approach and being responsive to the experiences of those people that we work with, remembering that everyone experiences trauma differently. So you may be working with somebody who's experiencing a traumatic event, and you've worked with somebody else who's had a similar experience. They're different people. You'll have to have a different approach. Somebody might be more willing to talk about it. Others might not. It's all very circumstantial, very individual. So building that trust is key. Next slide, please, Chloe. Choice. So offering real choice might be a challenge for us as practitioners, but acknowledging the power differential to support you in working relationally with people who may have experienced others misusing power. Really important to acknowledge that. That could be the underlying traumatic experience. So considering and addressing power imbalances. But also acknowledging the limits in choice around changing in staff or meeting setups. We should try to constantly keep these issues in mind to establish trust. So being able to give the person choice where they can make choices is really important, but being realistic in relation to where that can be done. So it's our responsibility to engage the individual and give them choice in how the work that we are doing continues. So thinking about obtaining informed consent, obviously that's part and parcel of what we do, explaining how information will be shared, the limits of confidentiality, giving that person options and discussing it with them what they would like to happen. So all things which are good practice, standard practice, things that we would expect in terms of confidentiality, sharing of information and explaining the process. And maybe reiterating those things when you do meet with the person so that information is clear, so they know that hasn't changed, could start to build the trusting relationship. Next slide, please. Which comes down to next in terms of collaboration. So working together, working towards a common goal. People who have experienced trauma may have little trust in their needs mattering to others or very little experience of being involved in decisions. So they might need support and encouragement to do that. Again, it could be that it's not that they don't want to, it's that they've never been able to make decisions. So it's really encouraging, it's that strengths-based sort of approach, really encouraging the person to make decisions for themselves and giving them the tools, the support in order to do so. So it could involve asking someone what they need for a certain part of the meeting or a visit, identifying coping strategies that might be helpful or problematic in the longer term, and discussing what support is in place for those options. Next slide, please. And this is the fifth principle, so empowerment. So all the other principles that I've discussed here will contribute to empowering people we work with. So showing them that they can be safe, showing that you can be trusted, and so can they. Offering choices and collaboration to someone who has never had these options, they are all empowering. So it means treating the person as an equal, which may include offering challenge, constructive challenge, which in itself results in reflection and can be really useful, helpful to the person. So supporting and empowering individuals to recognise unhealthy coping strategies can be a life-changing opportunity. But again, you can only get to that point provided you give them that safe space, build that trust, collaborate with the person, enable them to make their choices in order to feel empowered. Next slide, please, Chloe. So you can keep clicking. Thank you. Yeah. So it's about moving away from the what's wrong with you to what has happened to you. That is the That is the core element of trauma-informed practice. Trauma affects everyone, it can happen to anyone, and trauma symptoms are natural responses which arise from our brain and body defending itself in the face of fear. So we're not diagnosing or labelling in the instance of what's wrong with you. We're looking beyond that for presenting symptoms and considering what's happened to that person, which has created those symptoms in the here and now, in the present. If we can understand where that behaviour has come from, the origins, then we can support people to heal and recover from their experience. So this change of approach, I suppose, in terms of what's wrong with you to what has happened to you is crucial in terms of trauma-informed practice. Next slide, please, Chloe. So I'm just going to give the highlights. I've got some, you will have access to the slides, as I said, and I've kept my notes in there so you can do some further reading. So principles of trauma-informed approaches in terms of do no harm, having that trauma awareness, which is why we're all here today, that emphasis on safety, both physical and emotional, that rebuilding of control through collaboration, through empowerment, and using a strengths-based approach where we're supporting the person to build on and develop their own resilience, hope, healing. So it's not about fixing people, but it's about supporting people to develop their own resilience and coping strategies within their life. So it's about being responsive to that person because each person's experience is different. It's less about doing or saying a specific thing and a lot more about how you think and how you as professionals approach situations. So it's a culture shift, not a manualized model. And it's looking at individuals as they are, as people with their own circumstances. There's a lot more to discuss on that slide, but I'm conscious of time. But like I said, my notes will be left on the bottom, so that then you can go through this as well. But those are the sort of the highlights in terms of do no harm and those approaches. Can I have the next slide, please, Chloe? So again, and I know I've said this a few times, but that relationship-based practice is crucial to being trauma-informed as professionals. It doesn't require specialist trauma training. It's that awareness and how we relate to and with the people that we work with. It's about attending to trauma without focusing on it, like we've just discussed. We don't need the person to go through all the details in order to support them. That can be re-traumatizing. They may not feel able or comfortable or safe to be discussing that with you. So it's understanding and validating current struggles in light of trauma and learning to live differently. Considering the relationship with us as professionals can be the opposite of the abuse and the trauma that they've experienced. So going from fear to safety, from control to empowerment, from abuse of power to transparency and accountability. So all of these things linked to those principles of a trauma-informed practice approach. Can I have the next slide, please, Chloe? So another point for reflection, which again, if we had more time, it would be great to put you into groups as well. But so I'd like you to think about a person that you work with now or you have done in the past through this lens of trauma. What hidden impacts do you think trauma was having on them and on your working relationship with them? How might these definitions and these discussions within this training session help you to understand the ongoing impact of trauma on that individual? How could you use this understanding of trauma to find effective ways to engage with that person which was affected by trauma? So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes. I know it's not a lot, just to have a think about that. Okay. A couple of minutes have gone by. Is anybody wanting to share any of their sort of initial thoughts? Don't have a lot of time, but if anybody's got anything they would like to share, either on the chat, or if you're still thinking, because it's okay. I'll let you stay with your thoughts. Can I have the next slide, please, Chloe? So in terms of survival tips for working with trauma, the key really is, and that's why it's there in first place, it's that reflective supervision, making time and supervision is a priority, so that we can protect ourselves and protect others that we work with. So that reflection is crucial. That organisation awareness of the vicarious traumatization. So thinking about how being exposed to others' traumatic experience can impact on us as professionals, that compassion fatigue, critical as well. So we're not normalising certain traumatic experiences. We're really working with the person and seeing them for them. Having that acknowledgement of difficult and ambivalent feelings is also perfectly valid and important. The separation of our own experiences from the clients, from the people that we work with, really important to be able to do that. And again, linking it back to supervision is a way to go through that. The non-blaming organisational culture as well, a learning culture, is crucial, and what we're doing here today, right? We're all learning as different organisations, and understanding that interpersonal experience in the context of trauma, how trauma affects people differently, and impacts people differently, and what we see in people will differ significantly. And remember, it's only a little bit that we see. If you think of that iceberg or that pyramid, it's only a little bit that we're seeing. There's a lot more underneath going on for that person, which only through creating, establishing and creating safe, trusting relationships will be able to support the person without necessarily needing their life story. They might not be ready to share that with you. They may never be ready to share that with you. But if they feel safe, they may feel able to work with you. So trying to move away from that language of, you know, the person's not engaging, they're disengaging, thinking a bit deeper than that, taking a step back and thinking, right, what's going on? What might be going on? What am I seeing? Why might this be the case? How can I go about this? How can I make the person feel safe? How can I make the person want to work with me? Is crucial to supporting people who have or are experiencing trauma in effect. Can I have the next slide, please, Chloe? So in terms of reflection, next steps and evaluation, I'd like you to take a few moments to think about what you'll take away from this short session. What will you do differently? So you've come into this session, obviously I know you're very experienced practitioners, but you've come into this session working in a way. What will you do differently after this session? What might you think about when you're working with somebody or somebody who you're currently working with? What's that point of difference you can make in supporting that person? What do you need to do to ensure you make use of this learning? Can you share this learning with others? Remember, we spoke about that organisational context, so we all need to be working in this way. So could you share this learning with others? Also a reminder as well to add these to your sort of CPD, so that this doesn't just become a training session that you attend, but something that you do with, hence me trying to put a lot of information in so you could keep it as an information pack. And has anybody got any questions? We do have a little bit of time. Also, I've put a few references in there. Could you just go to the next slide for me, Chloe, please, just so that attendees can see that there's a few references that they can draw upon on there as well. So there'll be lots for you to be able to read, reflect, think. I already left you a lot of questions for reflection throughout. So here we're saying when people have the same pattern of behaviour, example being involved with risky people. I'm not sure what that referred to. I only just saw that in the chat, Sahira. Don't know if you want to say a little bit more about that.
It was just in relation to when you asked us to reflect on someone that we might have worked with. It was just someone that I worked with who had a history of sexual abuse as a child, and they were there was a pattern of behaviour where they were consistently befriending people or getting involved with people that were sort of taking advantage of them, either sexually or in other ways.
Right.
So it was just obviously, I guess, having that understanding of why that was happening and helping them to form, I guess, healthier relationships or look at ways of getting them, away from situations like that, which I think they did eventually manage to do with some support. But obviously, it's something that you have to. I think because I became aware of trauma with this.
Oh, lost you there, Sahira. We've lost Sahira. So in this case, it seems Sahira was aware of those potentially traumatic experiences. So it'll be interesting to know what approach Sahira would have sort of now, with some of the information that we've discussed today. But we've lost Sahira. Anybody else want to comment, say their reflections out aloud? It's a lot to think about.